everyone. Welcome everyone. Today we have another new episode, and this episode is very, very important, especially for the youth communities. Even in Asia Pacific, many university student has keen interest about space studies and space related things. And we have our famous speaker, Professor Talib Rafaels. We have Professor Rob, Professor Edward, and two more energetic speakers, Mr. Aaron and Nicholas. So I want to start from Professor Edwards. How do you want to analyze today's topic and how you want to share your experience from NASA?
Well, I'll start out by saying this. Space is a place, not a government policy. It's a place where you can do research. It's a place for commercial activities. It's a place for exploration. The first thing to do when we talk about space is to think about what exactly it is. I'll give a little bit of background. I was a high school intern in 1969 working at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. And for those of you who are watching on the video, this is the flight plan for Apollo 11, which I had a copy of because I was sitting there in the control rooms watching it and doing errands and so forth. And of course, it was an extremely exciting time to watch the moon landing from a real space center. By the way, interestingly enough, some years later, this was about 20 years ago now, I put together a book on space, the free market frontier, and I managed to get Buzz Aldrin, who of course was on that first moon landing, to do a chapter in the book. And what's interesting about Buzz Aldrin's chapter in here is he's a great innovator as well. He's like 90 years old now and still going strong. And he came up with the idea of what's called a cycler. In other words, what you do is you launch a rocket from the Earth, and it kind of goes and swings around the moon using the moon's gravity, and then it sort of swings back and then slows down because of the Earth's gravity. It goes back to the moon, and it goes like this. And all you have to do is go up and meet it when it's at its slowest point, and you can put astronauts and cargo on there. So again, this guy is really thinking innovatively. But that's the message I want to give to your audience today. For many, many decades, folks like me who were working in the space policy area, and again, I go back to literally the first Apollo landing, have been saying it's great that the government was able to do this thing. It's a remarkable human achievement. It's one of the great human achievements of all mankind. But the problem is that governments in the long term cannot do things very efficiently. And what we needed was, instead of NASA basically being essentially a monopoly provider of access to space as well as other things, we needed some kind of private competition. Many of us were pushing for that. Many of us were saying NASA, instead of building spaceships, should basically contract out to private providers. And private providers since the 1980s and late 70s were trying to get involved. And of course, that's what we see today. We see Elon Musk. We see Jeff Bezos. We see Richard Branson basically now pioneering private space activities. And what's most important is this: bringing the costs down. The International Space Station was proposed in the mid-1980s, and it was going to cost $8 billion, and it was going to be up in the early 90s. And then the price went up to $49 billion, and it went up and up and up, and it probably cost about $100 billion in the end to get it up there. The space shuttle was supposed to be reusable and therefore cheaper. And in fact, it probably cost $500 million to launch, each shuttle. It wasn't completely reusable. Two of the boosters were reusable, but the big orange external fuel tank, a $50 million piece of capital equipment, flew to the edge of space, and then they dumped it in the ocean. People like me were saying, why not just put it into orbit and let private people retrofit it and make it into a space station? Well, of course, what you see now is Elon Musk and some other private companies are doing exactly what people like me have advocated for many, many years. And this is very exciting. I want to give one quick example here. I know one of his chief rocket designers, and I was talking to him. This was in the early days, about a decade or so ago, about how can Elon get the costs down. And for example, if those of you who are looking, a spaceship or a rocket has these big nozzles at the end where the fire and everything comes out, and these things are huge. Anyway, At one point, they were going to test one of Musk's rockets, and his rocket scientist came to him and said, "Elon, we've got a problem. The the 6 inches at the bottom of the thing of the nozzle have a little crack in it, and if it had been NASA, they would have had delayed it for 6 months. They would have had hearings. They would have had investigations. They would have to all cover themselves because they know Congress is going to get involved." And Elon says, "Well, let me ask you, if you cut off a little 6 inch ring at the bottom and just pull that 6 inch ring off, do you think it would make a big difference?" And the scientist said, "Probably not." He said, "Okay, just go ahead and do that." Or another example is if you take a look at a rocket, this doesn't have a copy, but there's these little maneuvering engines or nozzles on the side. And when he was designing rockets, he asked his scientists, "Well, can you go and see what NASA does so we can purchase some of these ourselves? Go to the supplier." And each of them costs like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And he said, "Come on, that's too much. Can't you find something better?" They literally went to hobby stores and they found these little engines in hobby stores that would take the pressure. They said, "Just use those things. You can get them for a few bucks in a hobby store instead of paying $100,000 each." It was Elon's money, so he could do whatever the heck he wanted. He could make his decisions. It was his money. If he blows up a spaceship, it's his spaceship. And you see what's happened. He's got to the point now where, of course, last week, 4 human beings were sent to the International Space Station on a private rocket created by Elon Musk. You see the same sort of entrepreneurship with Jeff Bezos. You see the same sort of entrepreneurship with Richard Branson, and you're going to see even more. And what this is going to lead to, it's going to lead to us settling and terraforming Mars. That's what's going to happen in the future. And so this is going to be an international effort, by the way, because even though it's American, I think we're going to need international help from people all around the world, the best brains everywhere. So if you're listening to me in the Asian Pacific area, guys, this is the future. I look forward to seeing you all on Mars.
Excellent, Professor Edwards. So we have our new panelist, Professor Adrian, also join. But I want to go to our ex-UN Secretary General for World Tourism Organizations. What about the space tourism? How do you want to analyze it? What will be the future?
Space tourism is the future. Edward is absolutely correct. We should be open-minded about it. Man is going to consume his ability to travel around Earth very quickly, and travel is going to become more intense. The challenges that Edward was talking about are challenges of cost related. And I think he simplified it in a very, very reasonable way, because we need to simplify the matter. Now, how do we go to space? Man is ready to go anywhere. The only thing is, can he afford it, and can that technically be okay? So I think the future is in space tourism without doubt, whether it's Mars or anywhere else. But going up the atmosphere and coming back by itself is an experience, just to see the world from a distance. My very good friend is Prince Sultan bin Salman, who's the first Arab astronaut to have gone to space. When I asked him once what is his most memorable experience in going to space, he went to space in the 80s with NASA. He said, when we first went, we were looking at each of our countries, country by country. Then we started to see the regions together. Then we stopped thinking about that. We started to see the whole world as one. I believe that this is the way that the human being can start seeing their world as one world. It's a very, very important element, because there is no way we could start perceiving the world in the right way unless we see it from a distance. Space tourism is the future of tourism without doubt. I hope Edward's efforts and predictions are successful, trying to make this affordable. And maybe then, only then, can it become a popular thing, because people have to take part in it in masses. Can't make it an elitist selective process. Just have it in those that don't have it. It has to be a popular thing. Before it becomes popular, it doesn't become a trend. Travel and tourism. I'm not an expert in this, so I'll stop at this point and I'll interact with others there as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Talib. We have our famous scholars, Mr. Rob. So how do you want to analyze today's topic, and what is the future we have?
Well, as a race, we tend to advance under stress, and so when things are pretty steady, we don't do a lot of advancement. Sadly, that often means we we wait for a large world war before we make big jumps. But the space program and the race to the moon, or race to space, actually created a lot of advancements as well, and certainly does so without the ecological and human cost of a war. So it's great to look elsewhere. I belong to the Lifeboat Foundation. One of our greatest concerns with regard to existential risks for the race is the fact that if something happens to this planet, we're pretty much done at the moment. And so having some level of redundancy would seem to be important for the continuation of the race. However, with regard to space exploration, there have been some fairly nasty problems that we're still dealing with. One is we're as a race, we're not really built for outer space. When astronauts go to space for long periods of time, they lose muscle mass, they lose bone mass, they have damage to their DNA, and these are relatively short trips, not the long trips we aspire to in terms of going to other planets in the solar system, and certainly not anywhere near the problems we would have if we went to other solar systems. So those are problems we need to address. And one of the big arguments now is, do we even send people in space, or do we send robots or engineered creatures into space to do things for us? Now, regardless of how that ends up, it's all driving advancements that we can use here on the planet. Once you're doing structured work to allow people to live in space, some of those same structures can be used to decontaminate water at scale. Even some of the air scrubbing technology can be used to take carbon dioxide out of the air here. So there are benefits to the planet that we get from solving problems in space, because it forces us to look at things very differently. One of our professors in graduate school was one of the engineers in charge of building parts for the space program. And one of the lectures that has stuck with me ever since was his lecture on how parts were selected for the program, which pretty much made sure I'd never want to be an astronaut. And what he described was this: they would build 3 parts for every single function, and every single function was triple redundant. And the testing process was this: they test the first part, and if it failed, they go to the second part. If it tested, and if it failed, they go to the third part. If it tested and failed, they would install the first part. They wouldn't build new parts. And they would rely on that triple redundancy to make up for any problems. And I'm thinking, yeah, but what if everybody's doing that and all three systems are failures? What was the catch? And that was it. That was the secret. He said the odds were against that ever happening, and we played the odds. I'm afraid if I was an astronaut, I probably would not have been that comfortable with that odds comparison. But it was a way to solve a problem that was unique. We didn't do that with anything else. And the reason it is each one of those parts was incredibly expensive to make. And if you did have to rebuild them from scratch, it would set back the program months, if not years in some cases. And so they just plowed ahead, and we did make it to the moon, and we did so relatively safely. So the space program really is part of kind of our future. If it's my belief, if we don't, expand out and look for new things, we'll atrophy as a race, and we'll be gone regardless. So it does produce some amazing stuff we've used in other industries. And of course, as Edward has pointed out, the commercialization of space has resulted in some very rapid advancement in terms of technology. The spaceships we're putting up now are using current technology, where in the time of the Apollo program, most of the spacecraft were using technology that was years, if not decades, out of date when they went into the air. And by using more current technology, it does create a little bit more risk, but it's allowing us to do things we might not have been able to do for decades from now. So it's an interesting time to be in space exploration, and I think it's something we absolutely need to be doing for the betterment of the race and the furtherance of the race.
Thank you. We have our another professor, Professor Adrian. How do you want to analyze today's topic, and what is your views? Yeah.
Well, I think that the big industry will be actually mining, because there must be a lot of minerals in the other planets. So I think eventually there's going to be a probably bigger than space tourism will be mining and minerals that we have ability to mine and send back to Earth. I think that's going to be an important topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We have our another friends from China. He is also activist from Transhumanist, Mr. Nicholas. So what's your view? What's going on inside China?
I live in China. I'm not from China.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
clear. That's very obvious.
Ni hao.
I don't follow that too much. Rockets in China. It's kind of difficult when I don't speak Mandarin. But I guess I should play off more of what other people have been talking about, and that so far has been like economics, innovation, the ability for innovation, and what are some of the goals with that innovation? Mining, colonizing, and these type of things. After living not just China, Southeast Asia, I've come to realize like that none of that is really going to help the everyday person. So far nothing has been talked about has been useful for 1.5 billion people who don't have a bank account or a smartphone. So while we discuss the future, and it's very casual because this is common in I'm sure all of you are familiar with the phrase transhumanism. And what's very common in my community is that we are always in a sci-fi. We're always thinking about that great adventure next, but we really ignore our weakest team members right here. We want the better of humanity, but we forget we are as strong as our weakest member, and our weakest member just died of hunger somewhere. And, it's very shameful in a way too, that it takes a private entrepreneur to revamp a whole culture of intelligent people to cut red tape and achieve. Elon Musk does deserve credit for that, but also it does outshine a lot of the bigger problems that we have every day. So I guess I'm a little bit more of an activist right now than transhumanist, just being a little bit more practical with where we're going and how technology and all this space discussion applies to everyday people, billions of people.
Thank you. We have our another activist from USA, Mr. Aaron. So how do you want to analyze today's topic, and what's your view about this space studies and this industry?
Well, as these other fine folks have said, those are all excellent, brilliant points. As far as my kind of contribution here, I look forward towards this future with kind of stars in my eyes, with all due puns intended. You're looking at companies that are talking about sending 1 million people to Mars projectedly by 2050. We're talking about a new era of space mining that's going to allow us to build these larger space stations and these much larger, more space-worthy vehicles in space, because getting this stuff off the ground is one of the largest costs. So being able to already have a platform in space by which to launch further out from is going to be completely revolutionary. You have technologies that, like such as 3D printing that are being looked at, building these colonies that as these technologies advance are going to help, build things here on Earth and are going to completely revolutionize the way that we look at construction. And going back to something that Mr. Nicholas anyways, had said, is that we are only as strong as our weakest link. And as spaceflight and it becomes more privatized, more commercialized, it also becomes more widely discussed. It starts to get into people's head like, oh my goodness, this stuff is possible. Now, of course, this is a travesty that, the bottom 10% always seem to succumb to the folly of the upper 90. That being said, a lot of these tech booms that are coming out in general are seeking to level that slate, because I think some of the most brilliant minds do come from these countries that are plagued by adversity, economically speaking. Because through adversity, as I believe somebody else had said, it does push us forward. We are a species that evolves under stress. And right now, the stress are things such as, some of the climate shift that we're seeing around the world, and things like that. And the technologies that, as somebody else had mentioned, that we are exploring for terraforming Mars and things like that. And actually, on the last discussion that we had on genetic engineering, things like that, are going to drastically alter the way that we view things here on Earth in such a way that perhaps soon, hunger might even be eliminated. So I'm very excited personally for this future where, we are all living on these Mars colonies and on these other colonies in space. And I just really hope that we are able to make wise decisions to get everybody on this same leap forward as a species, because as somebody else mentioned, it is utterly critical that we do this as a species. It is critical to our survival. And I believe that about sums up my views on that.
Thank you. Professor Edward, there are many questions actually audience ask for understanding this industry. This is very new for many countries. Developing nations, definitely this is new. So what are the benefits? Like if actually any countries, corporations, they do more investment on this industry, space industry, what are the major benefit they will get? What area they will get more benefit?
Well, I'll put this in several contexts. First of all, it is true that we have spin-offs going back to the Apollo era, but that's not the major reason to go into space. It's incidental. It's good that if, for example, to get us into space, we develop a new technology or whatever, entrepreneurs or others are going to figure out how to do something with it. And so that's good. But you could do the same thing the other way. By the way, if you're really interested in a detailed discussion, one of the best about how we got to the moon and Rob's points, for example, about how they worked and contracted for parts, I really suggest you take a look at Apollo, The Race to the Moon by Charles Murray. It's an excellent book. I know Charles, and in fact, I was on a panel with him to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the moon landing a year and a half ago. But the benefits, you have to think about direct, immediate versus indirect and long term. Frankly, the direct and immediate benefits are not going to be big. Okay. Just as with other technologies over the ages and other exploration, the benefits were not immediate. And so if, for example, if I'm somebody in Malaysia or Bangladesh or the Philippines or some other country, and I'm a business, I'm looking at where to invest, I'm probably not going to go to space first, quite frankly. There's many other industries locally and internationally that are going to bring much more benefit in the short run. And it's going to help build the intellectual infrastructure in those countries. But it's really in the medium and long term that you're going to see the benefits. For example, 20 years ago, I did that book on space, The Free Market Frontier. By the way, Dennis Tito was the first paying, people called him a space tourist. He called himself a private explorer who paid his way onto the International Space Station. He has a copy. It's a piece in my book. And you might say, well, if we were having this discussion 20 years ago, we'd say, what are the immediate benefits? Well, not much. So one rich guy basically gets to go into space. Isn't that wonderful? But what you see over the last 20 years is we've reached a point where the costs of going into space are actually going down, thanks to Elon Musk, thanks to Bezos, thanks to some of these entrepreneurs, and to their ability quickly to apply new technology and current technology. As Rob pointed out, back in the day, they were applying older technology, and by the time they got up there, it was almost out of date sometimes. But again, if you look in the long run, for example, as the costs go down, maybe in 10 years, some young person who's listening to me now and who's gotten into space studies and to some of the look at the various industries that are going to contribute to exploiting space, so to speak, or utilizing space. That person might not benefit right now, but 10 years from now, and they might be called upon. They might see some way of benefiting from space. By the way, I want to make a comment about mining. I'm very much in favor of space mining. The one thing I say to my friends who are involved in this is be careful not to overstate the value of what's in an asteroid, because a lot of times what happens is they'll say, well, let's say here's a mineral that's in the asteroid. It's this much. Here's the price right now on Earth. So if you multiply the price on Earth and the amount on this big asteroid, it's going to be some $80 zillion. Well, as we all know, when you start dumping any kind of commodity into the market, the price is going to go way, way, way down. But that's okay, because then we're going to have all that stuff, and we're going to have very cheap whatever the mineral is. So again, it's going to be in the long run that you're going to see the benefits. So one other thing I want to mention, because this come up in a couple of the comments, I remember back during Apollo 11 and during the moon landing flights, people were saying, well, shouldn't we use all this money to eliminate poverty? And it's not that I don't want to eliminate poverty, but the path to prosperity is usually not spending more money. It's usually creating the systems that allow entrepreneurs to create value. And I give the example of China. 40 years ago, 9 out of 10 Chinese were living in abject poverty, or poverty below the international standard of what is, the lowest level. Today, it's only 1 Chinese in 10 rather than 9. How did that happen? It was because starting in the late 70s, China decided to go on a free market path, allow people to produce and benefit from their own creation of value. You have billionaires now, of course, in China. Now, I think, unfortunately, China is going backwards with their social credit system. That's unfortunate. But the point is, the path to prosperity is not, well, let's just take money away from Elon. Shouldn't be spending money on rockets. Bezos shouldn't be spending money on rockets. They should all be taxed away and dumped into poverty programs that have failed for 50 years in the United States. That's not the path. So anyway, I want to unleash this creativity, but I think it's going to be more in the long term that less developed countries are going to see the benefits, and the developed countries as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Dr. Talib, like you run United Nations, and you have a very good, strong understanding about the developing nations. How do you want to share your experience with our audience? Is it helpful for developing nations?
Yes, it is. I want to compare space activities now with aviation. 100 years ago, we would have had this discussion about airplanes. We would have said the same thing. It's not possible. It's expensive. It's dangerous. It's not for everybody. Today, aviation is an industry that's creating so much jobs, so much benefits to mankind. So I'm 100% with Edward. I think developing nations and developing entrepreneurs, young people, should pay more attention to space. It's the game of the future, without doubt. Now, we may put all obstacles that we want in front of us, but look at aviation 100 years ago. That's what I wanted you to think about. How would have been discussion like this if we were talking about 787 or jumbo jets at the time? Nobody would have even thought about transferring millions of people across the world to do that. Today, this is how we should look at space tourism. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Professor Rob. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, there I am. Okay, I had to find the microphone. One of the questions from the audience was what happened with space elevators, and space elevators are kind of a fascination of mine. The problem with space elevators has always been the tether. It's the cable that runs 36,000 kilometers up to the geosynchronous space station and allows the elevator to work. And the issue is, at the time we first came up with space elevators, we didn't have a material that was light and strong enough to make that leap. Plus, there are all kinds of issues with regard to space debris, wind, weather that had to be dealt with, and that tether was going to have to be strong enough to handle all of that while still being light enough to handle its own weight. Edward's holding up a book on space elevators. Currently, crystal graphene's looking promising. They were looking at carbon nanotubes earlier, but they just weren't strong enough and light enough. But crystal graphene does look like it's strong enough and light enough. And so just recently, in the last couple of years, the scientific community is kind of flipped a bit and come to the conclusion that maybe space elevators are possible. Where up to now, it was pretty much you'd run into that tether problem and you just simply couldn't get around it. And the interesting thing with regard to space elevators becoming possible, it will open up a whole bunch of other things. For instance, one of the big problems with regard to solar generation of energy is transferring that energy to the ground. It is certainly possible if you can figure out how to get a tether to work for an elevator, that you could figure out how to get a conduit to work for power. We're also, of course, talking about broadcast power, but the issue with broadcast power is whatever's between the broadcast entity and the receiver would probably be disintegrated. It's very difficult to make that safe, and then it too would have to deal with the weather, et cetera. But if you could create a conduit for the energy to travel through, then you could probably transfer that energy with a much higher reliability and much higher safety. So it just kind of showcases these efforts to solve problems in space have other applications. Because if you can develop something that's strong enough and light enough to carry an elevator, that same material could be used to construct aircraft, automobiles, buildings. I mean, if you wanted to create a building that would stand up to any kind of weather, having material that was both light and incredibly strong would be able to do that, assuming you can get the manufacturing costs down. So when you're solving problems like this, there is a benefit to the solutions beyond the space program itself. Edward pointed out space mining, which is another fascination. It's something I expect we're going to be doing with robots. It makes no sense because you can't scale it with people. And as I mentioned, the medical problems that would crop up would make the mining on Earth look pretty trivial. But we have full autonomy now in terms of robotic capability. We're proving that out with regard to the Mars exploration, also showcasing advancements in aerodynamic materials in the blades for the flying portion of the rover, and the capability of actually dropping an SUV-sized vehicle on Mars. It just amazes me how large that thing is and how well we were able to do it. And these are all problems that we solve that have potential elsewhere. For instance, the balloon-like landing platform of the rover has potential for safety mechanisms that are used in aircraft today. Whether we use them or not, something else again. But it gives us options that we didn't have before, and it forces people to think out of the box and gets them solving problems. And once people are solving problems, they can use that problem solution capability in other areas. And the nice thing about commercialized space is, as Elon Musk and Bezos solves the problems they're solving, they're also looking for other ways to apply this technology and sell it in other markets, advancing a number of industries. So it's amazing that we're able to do much of this stuff. Now, there was mention of the fact that while we're spending all this money on the space program, we should be spending that same amount of money to help the underdeveloped countries and solve hunger and the rest. And that's a false dichotomy. The reason is because if we weren't doing this, there's no indication that we would then take this money and put it into those programs. I don't disagree. That'd be an interesting way to do it. But the fact of the matter is we don't think that way as a race. And so if we collapse the space programs, as we saw when we collapsed the space programs in the US, that money did not flow into social programs. In fact, I'm not even sure where it went, but it didn't go to social programs. A lot of it went into defense. And you can take the technology that's being developed in space programs and do things like find other ways to grow vegetables and the rest. Some of the big factory farms are using technologies that were created to create farms and food in space stations and to solve the problem of oxygen regeneration and in future exploration. And we're using similar technologies to grow food at ever greater capabilities in these big factory farms. I'm not talking about factory farms on the ground. I'm talking about factory farms that are actually in factories. And so we're making progress, but we have to be careful about saying this either or thing, because the either or thing doesn't work. If you pull money from one program, chances are it's not going to go in the program that you want it to go into unless you specifically force that outcome. And we're not willing to do that. So we take it away from space, we just lose that advancement, and the money bleeds off someplace else, but it doesn't go where we intend it to go because we don't earmark it that way. Anyway, that's those are my thoughts for this round.
Yeah. By the way, Rob, just a quick note, Rob, about the Mars issues that you bring up. I highly suggest The Case for Mars by Bob Zuprin, and he's got updates on this. This is a 1997 book. He was the founder of the Mars Society. I'm a founding member as well. And so he addresses all of the issues such as radiation and these kinds of things. And Bob is very active. They have an annual conference. So anyone listening, and they do the conference, by the way, now virtually. So anyone who's listening in the Asian Pacific area, you can actually attend the Mars conference if you like.
Well, it is kind of interesting because recently we've come up with a theory that life may actually have migrated from Mars here, which suggests that going to Mars may allow us to discover some things about our own origins that we didn't know about.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you. Professor Adrian, Professor Talib, you want to add some point?
No, I just said that there are only advantages. And we can't just say that if we don't spend money on space, we'll spend it somewhere else. I completely agree with Rob. The thing is that actually we increase our chances of reducing poverty by exploring new horizons, new possibilities. And that's a risk we must take as human beings. We've always taken that risk. When we invented aviation, when we invented automobiles, when we invented ships, everything that we invented had its own backlashes. But we did that, and now today, our life is better. Our life on Earth can be better if we open up new horizons to it. Thank you.
Thank you. We have our scientific writers, science fiction writers, Mr. Anthony. So how do you want to analyze like today's topic? I know that you have internet issues, but yes. Mr. Anthony.
Sorry, the Wi-Fi has been absolutely terrible. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Hello,
yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Hello, Mr. Anthony, we can hear you.
Okay?
We can hear you. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, as a philosopher and a science fiction writer, I've touched on the whole concept of terraforming Mars and the possible problems that we could encounter in terms of terraforming Mars. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, the lack of a magnetosphere on Mars, poses enormous amounts of problems. Mars's magnetosphere was wiped out as a result of multiple asteroid strikes, which means that the planet is bombarded with lethal amounts of cosmic radiation, electromagnetic radiation, highly energetic particles, ultraviolet light, gamma rays, and so forth, from neutron stars, pulsars, and so forth. So if we are going to terraform the planet, this is something that we need to consider. Cosmic radiation is something we need to consider tremendously if we are going to colonize Mars and call Mars home. Now, obviously, once we build domes on Mars, we can build them from special alloys that have the capacity to repel deadly cosmic radiation and so forth. Okay? So these are some of the things we need to...
I'm sorry. I'm really sorry about that. Yes, Professor Adrian, you are from Australia and you are expert from Asia Pacific. So if you share some point, we know that Australia also Australian government invest a lot of money for this space studies and this kind of thing. So what's your analysis on that point and what your experience from Asia Pacific?
Well, yes, the Australian government has promoted the space industry. I'm not sure whether it's just a way to try to create jobs in Australia. So there may not be any thing more than politics involved. But I think for space, yes, there is two aspects of this. One is the natural interest of humanity about space. So why people study astrophysics, etc. And the other perspective is, is there any commercial value to explore space? So I think we have to differentiate. One part doesn't really depend about money. It's about human interest and human imagination, and the other part is about, you know, is there any value to exploring space? So, you know, so people don't need a reason, because there's a lot of young people want to study astrophysics and cosmology and all these things, and it's because they have a natural interest in you know, where maybe it's a metaphysical question about space and where do humans fit into the universe. So I think, you know, one side is humans have a natural imagination and interest in such matters, and from an economic perspective, we have to see the actual benefit, whether it's tourism or mining or something else for space.
Thank you. Mr. Nicholas and Mr. Aaron, both of you actually representing the youth communities. So when we go with this youth community, we find they have a keen interest about spaceship and this kind of things. So what's going on, Nicholas, inside China, especially their education systems? Especially, I want to know more about the youth engagement for this spaceship industries and this area, how they involve, what type of innovation happening.
It's difficult. I can tell you in education's perspective that the children learn mathematics much faster. They're learning like pre-cal trigonometry in middle school. So, but this is also a negative because they also get very uninterested in mathematics if they have any type of liberal options, like if their parents have more money, where they could choose what they want to do. Man, what do they do? I know a couple of horror stories about China's space program and the success that they're doing. Honestly, the artificial intelligence that China has been doing recently is even more interesting than their space program, because they use big data from their phones, like Huawei, to reverse design, I would say, AI, where they learn from people's behaviors, like their consumer options and how they think that way, and they reverse it back to programming, and it's pretty crazy. What children are interested in now, that there's a new generation of wealth, is, I would imagine, what kids my age were interested in is music, being a dancer more often, an artist of some sorts, you know. But I would also like to say more about the general discussion. And a lot of it always comes back to economics. And this is the curse and the blessing. The blessing is that it does innovate and it creates new minds. The Wright brothers, for example, they didn't fly for just achievement. They flew for profit. They figured out this puzzle, you know, to make money. So yes, that is the blessing. The curse is that the same economic system that benefits a few strategically steals from much more people. Okay, these minerals in our phones are not just found on a leaf; they're mined in the Congo. The metals on these shuttlecrafts come from one place in the world, Haiti. Haiti is a literal Marvel comic, Wakanda. They have a meteorite under their continent that they don't profit from. They are exploited for those minerals and materials. So as we try to discuss that space exploration will trickle down to everyday people's lives being better, perhaps farming and other agricultural achievements, that doesn't follow the logic of how the economic system currently already works and who benefits from these type of extreme bankings and debt from other nations. So in conclusion there is that it's not just a poverty issue, it's an economic issue. And it's how we view that, these developing nations or these impoverished nations Well, they shouldn't be impoverished. The only reason they are is because of the same reasons that we can achieve, and for the same reasons everyone cannot achieve.
Thank you. Mr. Aaron.
Yes, so just to add a little bit of perspective here, you know, Elon Musk's rather bold claim that he wants to have 1 million people on Mars by 2050. To put some perspective on that, we are closer to 2050 now than we are 1990. And that's one that often finds people, you know, wow, I never really thought about that. Well, you mentioned the young people today. Generally speaking, the young people do realize this. So, you know, it's nowhere near as far off as, you know, we would almost like to believe in a way. And you have technologies that are, you know, causing these geometric growth curves in this field, such as AI, you know, being able to analyze, you know, batch amounts of data at a ridiculous processing rate. You know, you have some breakthroughs coming out now in quantum computing that are going to augment that to a quantum degree, which is going to augment our space programs to a quantum degree. For instance, you have coming out of some of these analyses a description of sorry, I got my little paper here. You have a description of an Alcubierre drive coming out of NASA, which for those of you that don't know, it basically uses incredible amounts of either density or negative density to generate a temporal warp field wherein it is compressing time-space in front of it and is ejecting it out the back, essentially a jet engine for the very fabric of space-time. Now, you have research coming out on things like the Higgs boson and other super dense exotic particles that actually realistically could generate the amounts of density necessary to warp the fabric of space-time, which would allow for a temporally local field of you know, temporal distortion, allowing for, you know, superluminal travel. Now, we don't have the materials to achieve this yet. However, the paper that was written by Alexei Bobrik and Gianni, I'm probably going to butcher his last name, Martyr, you know, pretty decisively concludes that this is within the realm of physical possibility. And that's the key step, is thinking, what is possible? What do we have to work with? Or as Neil deGrasse Tyson said, you can debate all day whether or not the Earth is flat. Meanwhile, we will be focusing on what is possible and unlocking the secrets of the universe in doing so. And things like AI, gene editing, I think it's impossible to fathom what the next 20 years are going to look like, because we are on a geometric, a non-linear growth pattern. And I think the youth are fully aware of this, fully integrated into in and of this, have no fear of this, and therefore it is the youth that will be generating this geometric growth curve and even further accentuating it moving forward.
Thank you. I think we have our friends, Mr. Anthony, already joined. Mr. Anthony, can you hear me?
Yes, my apologies. The Wi-Fi has been absolutely awful, so my humble apologies. As I was saying before, with regard to Mars, and as a science fiction writer and a philosopher, I gravitate towards Mars tremendously within my work. And as I was saying, in terms of terraforming Mars in the future and so forth, we need to consider the problem that Mars lacks a magnetosphere. Mars's magnetosphere was wiped out as a result of multiple asteroid strikes, which means that the planet is subjected to enormous amounts of cosmic radiation, electromagnetic radiation, highly energetic particles, ultraviolet light and gamma rays, through supernova, neutron stars, and so forth. So if we're going to terraform the planet, we have to consider this aspect tremendously. Now, hello?
We can hear you.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Hello?
Go ahead.
This Wi-Fi is an absolute nightmare. My apologies. Hello?
Starlink will fix that soon.
That's right.
I'll chip in and get
Thank you, Elon.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Anthony, no problem. We can hear you. I think there is an internet problem.
Okay, so it's breaking up for me here.
Yeah.
So in terms of terraforming Mars, you can hear me okay, yeah?
Yeah.
Mr. Anthony, you
Yes.
just finish. You just finish. Don't worry. We can hear you. You finish your talk. Yeah.
Okay. In terms of terraforming Mars, if we're going to build domes on Mars, they have to be built from special alloys that have the capacity to repel deadly, lethal cosmic radiation, electromagnetic radiation, in order for us to colonize the planet and so forth. Now, we can introduce AI. Absolutely, artificial intelligence will be pivotal for us to actually colonize and build and so forth. Now, another problem is that solar winds are constantly eating away at Mars's upper atmosphere and ionosphere. Solar winds, radiation from the sun. So NASA are planning to launch a giant magnetic shield into space to help nullify some of these solar wind erosion processes. So once we build an atmosphere on Mars, this will be will actually make up for Mars's lack of a magnetic sphere, which is very important in terms of terraforming and so forth. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Hello?
Continue.
Yes.
Okay. So these are very important points to make. Also, the fact that Mars's gravity is very weak, we could lose the atmosphere produced on Mars because. Hello?
Yes.
Keep it rolling.
Keep going on.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, please keep
Yes,
going.
yes.
The interruptions are driving us nuts. So keep going or stop.
Hello?
Keep going.
Okay,
keep
Mr.
going.
Anthony, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Anthony. I
Okay,
want
I'm
to
going
give
to keep
chance
going.
to Professor.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Anthony, I can understand your problem. No problem. Professor Edward, there is a specific question from audience.
Okay.
I want to take this question for you.
Okay.
Yes.
The Wi-Fi.
I'm sorry. No problem. Mr. This is the question from Onika Shams. What are the technological challenges for space elevators in the last 5 years?
Okay. Well, yeah, I've got to sign off in a few minutes, and Rob has, I think, addressed the issue very well. When this book came out about 20 years ago, it gave it was a very good analysis of the space elevator and the technological problems. And one of the problems during that period has been literally getting the materials to continue to bind together. If you look at a zipper, if one little piece of the zipper comes undone, the whole zipper comes undone. And there's been that technological challenge, not just the strength of carbon nanotubes or whatever, but keeping it all together. And that's been one of the major challenges. And as Rob suggests, they're looking at some new technologies that might obviate that difficulty. By the way, I want to add that any of you in the Asia Pacific area who are interested in space elevators, if you want to see the best fiction work about it, that or one of the premier early fiction works, Arthur C. Clarke's The Fountains of Paradise has a space elevator being built in Sri Lanka. And as you know, Arthur C. Clarke, the great science fiction writer, lived in Sri Lanka for much of his life. So I would suggest that you take a look at that book as well as some of the others. I need to sign off in just a minute, so I wanted to say that this has been a fascinating discussion, and anyone listening in the Asian Pacific area, this is going to be part of the wave of the future. Space is a place, not a government program. It's a place where you can do all sorts of incredible things, whether it's mining, whether it's settling, whether it's doing science, whether it's tourism, whether it's space hotels. And entrepreneurs are going to come up with ways to use space that many of us can't even imagine. If you just look at what's happened in literally the last couple of weeks, we have Elon Musk putting 4 human beings on the International Space Station. We have not only another rover on Mars, but we have a helicopter on Mars. As somebody has said in an earlier broadcast, Mars is the only planet that's totally populated by robots. So this is extremely exciting. And I hope that we continue this discussion. And it also shows how Sharif is brilliant with his topics because they're all so integrated. For example, I like to say that you can either terraform Mars, the environment of Mars, to basically allow for human biology, or you can basically perhaps change human biology with genetic engineering to make it appropriate for Mars. there's another example of where you take a technology and perhaps genetically engineer us so that we are more suited, so that we're radiation resistant, and so forth. It's very exciting. And so thank you for a great show, Sharif, and to my colleagues, thank you for your input.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Edward.
Dr.
Thanks.
Talib. Especially you are politicians and you are expert of UN and the World Economic Forums. So what is the role of governments? Because I'm also from a developing nations. My observation, we need to improve a lot, especially for the education when we discuss about even AI, space studies, the robotics engineering, IoT, all of the modern science and technology. It's my observation from the education industry, we need to improve a lot. So what is your advice? How the government can play their roles in these situations, how they can like help their youth community to develop their knowledge and skills and their education system?
Okay, let's face it. The world is not led by developing countries now. This is a fact. So advancement will not be led by the developing countries. It will be led by the developed world. But the developing countries are going to benefit out of it. So they might as well catch up on the train wagon right now. What I'm saying is I'm not a scientist. I don't understand much of what elevators mean to start with, or mining or life on Mars or all of that. What I'm saying is very simple. There's an opportunity. Space is an opportunity for mankind. It's an opportunity that will not be missed. And there will be people that will be working on that to make it more beneficial for people on Earth, eventually. Everybody on Earth. So governments will have to catch up with that and understand that whatever investments they do in space programs and space research is going to benefit mankind altogether, not just a particular country. When I was telling about my story with my friend, the Prince of Saudi Arabia, what he said is the whole world becomes one. You don't see countries together. Space would eliminate borders between countries. It would the world would start looking like one big ball, which is what is very good nowadays for developing and for developed nations. But developing nations will not be leading the way in this because it takes lots of investment, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Robs, we want to take more questions from audience. So Noor Fazrin, what is the contribution of space technology in our daily lives? If you just explain how it works and what is the real scenario actually?
Well, a lot of things have come out of the space program. I mean, the most widely spread one, of course, is Velcro. Velcro came out of the early exploration trips to the moon, and we used that broadly. We've made advancements in terms of how we move power. We've made advancements in terms of energy density. We've made some interesting biological advancements as well from the experiments that have gone on in the space station. There are several lists you can look up on the web for things that have kind of flown out of the space program. But if you look at some of the really interesting stuff that's going on now, the technology that's going into allowing SpaceX, for instance, to land their boosters is extremely advanced, and that same technology can be used in coming autonomous vehicles. We've got autonomous ships now that are going out in the ocean that are somewhat related to this. Right now, there's a lot because we're using current technology in the space program as opposed to older technology. There's a lot of bleed across. So, for instance, some of the technology that Elon Musk used to create the autopilot system in the Teslas is somewhat related to the technology that's being used to land those rocket boosters. And so there's a lot of bleed across right now because the same company, the same individual is now on the bleeding edge of both automotive and space travel. We'll see if the same thing happens with Bezos. He doesn't quite have the same breadth of industry with Blue Origin that Musk has with SpaceX and Tesla. But right now, it's what's fascinating is the efforts being used to develop these space programs are run now in parallel with efforts to advance other things, autonomy, AI, and other forms of computing. And the other interesting thing is with regard to, and Anthony brought this up as well, when the magnetic field failed on Mars, the same thing is happening here. The magnetic field's failure was actually caused by the slowing of the magnetic core, of the iron core on the planet. It happened something like 32 million years ago. And then the solar winds stripped the atmosphere out off the planet relatively early, we think. But the same thing could happen here. Our magnetic core is slowing. The magnetic field is getting weaker. And so the same kinds of things we're thinking about to restore the atmosphere on Mars could be used to protect the atmosphere here and allow us to continue to live on this particular planet. So because the reality is we don't have it right now. We don't have any place else to go if something happens to this planet. This is the only planet we've got. So finding ways to both protect this planet and finding ways to get to another planet in case something goes wrong here is very important to sustaining the race. I'll give you an example. When the Hadron Collider was being put up, there were a bunch of people that were really worried that it might create a black hole and the black hole could destroy the planet. They did the calculations. They decided that was remote. But later on, they discovered they were 2 magnitudes off in the wrong direction with regard to the risk. Now, when you're talking about something that could destroy the planet, being 2 magnitudes off with regard to risk is a little troubling. And we're experimenting all the time on this planet. Even if we were able to go to Mars and do some of these more difficult experiments on Mars rather than Earth, would extend our potential life and longevity as a race. We kind of want to do some of this really dangerous stuff. I mean, we need to do exploration and understand science, but there is risk associated with that, and we can move that risk off planet. Once again, it could help us with long-term survival. So it really comes down to the fact that if a race isn't growing, if it isn't expanding, then it's stagnating, and a stagnating race is going to become obsolete.
Unsustainable.
Unsustainable. Yeah, exactly.
Sustainability is about sustaining life on Earth.
Exactly.
That's what it is.
Yep.
No more, no less.
Yes, thank you, sir. Yes, Mr. Aaron.
Yes, so I just to talk on Anthony's point there a little bit. One of the interesting things about these electromagnetic shields is what it sounds to me like he's describing is a heck of an energy source. If we can, and this is just a small little piece here, but if we can figure out a way to not only deflect, but to somehow absorb and channel these massive amounts of energies, and this is where things like graphene are starting to blow our minds. I think and that's just one material. Who knows what will be coming out for us to not only negate the negative, but perhaps to turn that into a positive to create the energies necessary to create things like an Alcubierre drive.
Thank you. Mr. Anthony, can you hear me? I want to give you 2 minutes and you can share your views.
Yes. Well, I hope you can hear me, actually. Sorry, the Wi-Fi has been awful. My apologies. Humble apologies.
Technology. It's technology.
I was speaking about the whole notion of Mars lacking a magnetic. Hello?
Yeah, yes.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Hello?
Mr. Anthony, you go ahead. We can hear you. You complete your sentence.
We can hear you, but it's very disruptive to have you keep going on with hello.
Yes. Sorry. Departing from the point genesis of my previous presentation. Okay. I was speaking about the lack of a magnetosphere on Mars. The lack of a magnetosphere on Mars poses enormous amounts of problems in terms of us colonizing the planet and so forth. Hello, can you hear me?
Please finish your sentence. We can hear you.
Sorry, you're breaking up.
Okay.
Finish, Anthony. Keep going. Don't stop.
Hello?
We can hear you. Don't stop, Anthony.
Keep going. Don't stop. We can hear you
stop.
fine.
Can you hear me now?
Don't.
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Yes.
Okay. So basically, I was speaking about the fact that Mars lacks a magnetosphere as a result of multiple asteroid strikes and the cosmic radiation, ultraviolet light, electromagnetic radiation that the planet is subjected to as a result of a lack of magnetosphere. And obviously, this poses enormous amounts of problems in terms of human evolution on the planet and so forth. So obviously, I spoke about how shielded habitats that have the capacity to repel deadly cosmic radiation is one of the ways forward to nullify this problem. and so forth. Also, the fact that Mars's gravity is very weak. It basically means that once we have created an atmosphere on Mars, it could be lost to outer space, because gravity and atmosphere is intercombined in the sense that in order to retain an atmosphere, you need a certain gravity.
I believe he has muted himself.
Greenhouse effect.
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, thank you.
Yes,
Thank you, Mr. Anthony. Thank you.
I keep breaking up.
Yes,
I
no
keep
problem.
breaking up.
Professor Adrian, there is a specific question because audience are very interested about this space technology, especially there, the youth. And yes. Ali Ahmed, thank you for your question. How does space exploration affect technology? Professor Adrian.
Well, well, if you look at the previous space age in the 60s, that as someone previously said, it greatly improved the technology. I'm not sure whether we have that big of a leap now, because we learned a lot already. But I think that one thing which may be affected is the air travel. We used to have supersonic jet, the Concorde, but we no longer have a supersonic jet. So maybe space travel allowed us to have supersonic jet again in our planet.
Thank you. Dr. Talib, you want to add some point?
Yes. I want to just define technology. Technology is everything that we invent anew. It's nothing new about it. We're not just living in a technological world. We've always been living in a technological world. When we invented fire as human beings, that was technology. Technology has its downturn and its front and its advantages. So space is just another technological opportunity. That's all what we should talk about. We shouldn't think of technology just as IT now, or as Wi-Fi, or as Anthony cutting down. This is just a downfall of technology. Technology is anything that we do to change our lives, and space is just another step in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholas and Mr. Aaron. Mr. Nicholas, yes.
Same question.
Yes.
What is the contribution of space and which space eventually will happen, of course, absolutely. I'm a Star Trek person, and there's a reason, there's a culture to that. Will it be commercialized? You have to go to Mars on Tesla rockets, or will it just be a humanitarian achievement? Will it just be humans having come together and done it, is the question. And I think that's a question, if you think about, will be whether or not we even get to space successfully as a colonizer or a miner or any other way. We could eventually, with the same economic systems now, we're likely to destroy ourselves. A global blackout, an internet blackout, China shooting a missile at the USA satellites, the vice versa, and just causing havoc on the world for even 10 minutes of no internet. The global economy can collapse. And so something to think about while we move towards the stars is how we're moving there and who we're moving with.
Thank you, Mr. Aaron.
Yes, first of all, I would like to say that Starlink is going to be incredible. Being able to blanket the entire world in internet. However, I think there's going to be a lot of advancements made upon that basic architecture, but it's incredible that exists. As far as how space is affecting and is going to affect technology, if all of the future of the human race is among the stars, then one could argue that space exploration now affects technology infinitely so, just as infinite as our potential futures are.
That's right.
Thank you. Yes. Professor Edward, thank you for joining again. So specifically, like for developing nation, even we are observing that some of our speakers cannot communicate properly because of internet connection. Even Starlink is a very big thing. It's moving around. So how it works, how it will be helpful those who need good internet connections, Wi-Fi connections, how it will be helpful for like Asian countries or African countries, especially the developing nations. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as has been said, yes, thank you. I'm able to join you again for a little bit, and then I have to sign off again. But yeah, as has been said, uh, poor Anthony there is having his internet problems, and Starlink is yet another technology that could solve that problem. I've spoken in the past about the importance of competition between technologies that are providing some kind of value or service. In this country, we have fiber optics, which are good for very densely populated areas like cities. We have
Which country is that? Which country is that, Edward? What are you?
in the
USA.
United States. The United States.
Okay.
We have fiber optics is one of the big things that's very. It makes economic sense at $10,000 a mile in cities. We have 5G towers, 4G, and now 5G towers right around where I live right now. And of course, for more rural areas, and this would be very important, of course, in parts of Asia, in Bangladesh, for example, in some of the rural areas of the Philippines or Malaysia, Starlink is going to provide a very inexpensive way to communicate, and perhaps even for Anthony over there in Britain who's having trouble with his systems. But the important, I'll make two comments here. The important thing is, first of all, to make sure these technologies are competitive. One of the problems we have right now in the United States is this administration is pushing a particular technology. They want fiber optics everywhere, except for the fact that fiber optics does not make any economic sense whatsoever in rural areas, for example. But they say, well, let's spend hundreds of billions of dollars to do this. It's pretty insane. The other thing I want to mention, and I think, Aaron, you made this point, as we get into space, we're going to be building more space infrastructure. For example, right now, a space station has its own power supplies. And if private companies start putting up stations, they'll have their own power supplies. But one of the plans from some of the entrepreneurs is to, for example, create essentially a power station in space. So if you want to put a module up there, you simply can plug into it. In the same way that in this country, early on, a century or so ago, you had to build a factory and then you had to have your own power supply in the factory. Then entrepreneurs started building electric grids so that instead of having your own power supply, well, you just plug the thing in, which of course meant that you could have more small businesses, medium-sized businesses, and so forth. And so I think you're going to see that kind of thing happening in space where companies will build space infrastructure, which means that if I want to put up an orbiting hotel or honeymoon suite, well, now it's going to become a lot cheaper. By the way, I've heard a lot of sort of doom and gloom and concerns about space and so forth. And by the way, as with Rob here, I'm also with the Lifeboat organization. So I take these issues seriously, but I say you have to progress, you have to move forward. And yeah, if you come up with problems, fine, you solve the problems as you go. But as I say, that's why I think it's exciting in terms of your question about competitive technologies, see which one works the best, and then the market will decide, and paying customers will decide. And if you have infrastructure in orbit, paying customers will decide. Any of you listening, especially young people, there was an incredible visionary, Gerard K. O'Neill, who did a book, and there's now a documentary out on the Space Channel about Gerard K. O'Neill, The High Frontier, about building giant orbital habitats. And Jeff Bezos has been very clear. Jeff Bezos was a student of Gerard K. O'Neill, and Jeff Bezos has said, "This is my model." Now, whether it works or not, I don't know. That's the thing. But again, if you want to sort of know what is inspiring, in this case, Jeff Bezos, who's got billions of dollars and is putting it into space, take a look at Gerard K. O'Neill's book, The High Frontier.
Thank you, Mr. Rob. You are a tech analyst and you have a crystal clear understanding about technology and innovations and other things. But my question is that as we have a major objective to work with grassroots level people, even we are working actually, we are sharing our content 100% free with millions of people. It's with our own capacity as much as possible we are doing. We are not a big corporation, we are very small corporations, and every day we are trying to grow with your contributions. But my question is that how we can change this grassroots level with lot of innovations and technological advancement, how the big company can connect with this grassroots level peoples, and they have many talented, how we can bring this talented and develop new innovations and go for the global civilizations and this kind of things. What is your advice?
Well, it's kind of a boil the ocean question, but because it's kind of like work hard. I mean, one comment though for Edward: whenever you move your head away from the microphone, your sound cuts off.
Oh, sorry.
So when you're talking and you're moving your head around, you sound like this when you're talking, and the sound's coming and going. So just face to the microphone. It's difficult to follow otherwise. So anyway, so as far as collaboration, most of the large companies have education outreach programs. You can certainly engage with those. They've also got funding programs for startups. Generally, they don't get involved in a small startup until it's got a viable product, something that they can sell. That they're not angel investors per se. They come in as an alternative to VCs, but you can get funding from these companies if you're working on something that they find interesting. And several companies still maintain relatively large both education and lab facilities. Intel is heavily invested in a variety of colleges all over the world in terms of research programs, and they have their own labs. IBM as well. Most of the larger firms have blended efforts with education and in-house. But if the way to do it is if you're working on something that dovetails with what a commercial entity is doing, it's probably worthwhile to have a meeting and see if there's synergy between the two efforts. And at the very least, you can find out if there's prior art that you were unaware of that might impact what it is you're doing. Because there's nothing worse than working on a year and a half on a project and find out that somebody else already had the idea, and by the time you actually mature theirs is in market. Also be aware that sadly enough, companies do borrow ideas from other folks. So you do have to be a little circumspect in how it is you're doing stuff. Most larger firms have policies against this, but as an auditor, I've seen those policies violated a number of times. So you also need to not be too naive about this stuff. If you've got something really great, make sure you've got people protecting it. So that you can retain ownership of that property when you're done. Big companies do have a habit of stepping in and then stepping on smaller groups. I shouldn't say habit, a bad practice of doing that. That from an executive standpoint, they tend to try not to do that. But people are people. So you do have to be careful, and that means when you're building out, make sure you've got somebody on your advisory committee that's got some experience working with large companies. Some of the best work I've seen is when somebody that's retired out of a large firm is recruited to help a younger firm get their feet on the ground and kind of navigate the pits and problems of bringing a product to market. It's great to have all the energy in the world, but there are avoidable mistakes that should be avoided, and sometimes experience can help you do that. But on the other hand, you bring in too much experience, and they're going to tell you can't do something that you otherwise might be able to do. So make sure you maintain that balance. But when you're talking about working with companies and you're a small entity, it's all about finding the right partner, and that right partner is somebody that's interested in you, doesn't want to just invest money, but will put in time and effort as well. In other words, be a true partner and not just an investor in the early phases. So finding that right partner and finding the right set of people to surround your company with to navigate the corporate difficulties is kind of critical to your advancement and furthering of your goals.
If I may add something.
Yes, I think Mr. Aaron wanted to add.
Very,
Yeah.
very important.
Yes.
Competitiveness.
Yes.
You have to be competitive. That's the key for advancement. Sorry.
Yes, but I have a one thing, like example, what I understand, even from the developing nations, they are also invest lot of money for startup, for their ecosystem, for their innovations and other things. But I'm just giving you some of the it's not a complaint, it's some of the feedback. Like there are many innovators, they say that okay, we are trying to innovate something, those who are not, let's say, connecting like the Intels or IBMs or this kind of company, they say that okay, we are not getting enough support from the government support only their own relatives or the people. Especially this complaint come from the developing nations. Especially I can give you many evidence from our World Talent Economy Forum, because we are also working with many innovative entrepreneurs in the remote area. So what is the problem? Do you think that our politicians, the developing nations politicians, they are doing their job properly, they are managing the talent properly, they are helping their nations properly? What is the gap, or what is your honest opinion?
Who are you asking?
I'm asking Dr. Talib, because he's a politician, professional politicians. Yes.
Thank you. Of course
Yes.
not. Of course not. Our problem in developing countries is with governance, is with leadership, without doubt. If we had honest leaders, if we had leaders that represent the will of the people and the interest of the people, we'd not have the problems we're talking about here. But that's not the challenge, because things are going to change whether these leaders like it or not. The world is changing whether we like it or not. Technology is changing us. And I am not for gloom and gloom like Edward said, or Nicholas was trying to hint at, because I believe that the world is getting better and better every day. Today's world is better than yesterday, and tomorrow is going to be better than today, without doubt. These leaders are disappearing very quickly, and this is something that we should always keep in mind, that leadership is important. And even developing countries have some good examples of leadership now. These good examples will have to spread, will have to be spread. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Aaron, I think you want to add some point here.
Yes, absolutely. More accentuate than add. What I will say is that what you are doing right now is bridging the gap with the World Talent Economy Forum, and by platforming, giving people a platform is what is creating this change that Talib said, where the people are in a way realizing our power by being given platforming by not just the internet itself, but by people like you, Sheriff, and the World Talent Economy that are giving platforms to grassroots people. This is exactly how.
Very true.
And thank you for that.
Yes, we just trying. Even from my personal life, I get this learning. Actually, knowledge is one and only solutions that I can change myself. I can do something for the society. I can do something for our community. So we have to develop knowledge, and definitely, First World has the good knowledge, and we can get this knowledge and we can utilize it for our local ecosystem development. So yes, basically, when we start our World Talent Economy Forums, our major objective, how we can minimize the gap in between developed nations and developing nation. And honestly, I believe that there is no gap in between a remote areas people from developing nations or a student from Harvard or Oxford University. It's all about exposure.
Internet has brought us together.
Exactly. Like every sessions, like, yes, definitely.
And
must be supported at all costs, not just your program, but every program like it that bridges the gap between high and low must be supported at all costs.
Here.
Very true.
Yeah.
Very true.
I completely agree with these points. As some of you know, in the late 80s, early 90s, I came up with the idea of an index of economic freedom. When I was working at the Heritage Foundation, I put a link to the latest version in the chat for us. And what we tried to do, the concept was to look at what were the factors that could measure economic freedom, and then correlate it with GDP growth, per capita income, things like that. And one of the first papers I did was comparing the four Asian tigers, Taiwan, Singapore, South Korea, and Hong Kong, with the African countries. And the Asian countries at that time were taking off. And the biggest factor involved was economic freedom. But I want to focus specifically on your question, Sharif, and that is that the thing that has held back the African countries most of all, and a number of the Asian countries has been government corruption. And the fact that, again, if they're supporting an industry, they're not supporting the industry because it's the best industry or it's going to help build infrastructure for the entire country. It's because this is somebody's brother-in-law or something like that. And that's the biggest factor. And that's why these kinds of grassroots forums that you're putting together, and why information technology is allowing people on the ground to basically circumvent the government and to talk directly like we're doing now. I'm getting all sorts of friend requests on social media from people in India, Bangladesh, and Asian places and Africa, because of the work I do with Africans and the work I do with you guys. It's great. And this kind of grassroots movement is going to, I hope in the future, undermine the corrupt government monopolies and then allow great entrepreneurs and thinkers, whether they're in Malaysia, Singapore, or wherever, to really flourish in a global economy. By the way, Singapore is a country that has done pretty well and done the right thing.
Yes.
It's not that they're an anarchist country. Some people think as a libertarian, I'm an anarchist. Not quite. But the point is, they've done it a little bit better in some of the countries than others.
Because of governance, because of right governance model.
Because transparency and this sort of thing, and the government realizing they can't do anything. Again, it takes a Elon Musk or a Jeff Bezos or a Steve Jobs to say, hey, let's try this new wacky thing and see if it works. And it might not work. And then if it does work, well, guess what? You get whole new industries.
Just one point I just want, what I learned from Singapore, I just want to add, like for Singapore government, they just implement 3 things, and they said if you can implement these 3 things in your country, your nations will be developed. Number 1, meritocracy. Right people need to be in the right place. Do not depend on your family members. Number 2, better policy. You have to bring all of the best policy from the right wing, from the left wing, and implement it. And number 3, you have to reduce corruption. Zero tolerance on corruption. So
Absolutely.
if you can implement these 3 things, ultimately any nations will grow. So there are more expert panelists. They can discuss. Yes.
I just want to say something. Sorry, this is a very American perspective, I know, but I can't restrain myself. My mother's family were Italian immigrants from a completely impoverished village. They came over here and they had to work their butts off. My wife's family, most of their family were killed in the Holocaust, but they managed to get over here. I worked my way through college, cleaning toilets, that sort of thing, because I had the opportunity. And now I'm having this great forum. Meritocracy is one of the things that I think is the best of America. Wherever you come from and whoever you are, if you can work your way up, if you can use the liberty you have, then yeah, that's great.
Yes.
You're right.
Thank you. It's really great session. I'm sure the audience, they are come up with the different questions, and it's really great session for us. Share our content as much as possible with your government, with your policymaker, with your corporation, in your classroom. I know already many of the education institutions, they start to utilizing our World Talent Economy Forum in their classroom. They're utilizing our content. So I'm really happy how our speakers contributing for our World Talent Economy Forum. We have our summit 29th and 30th May of this month. So for futuristic leadership, I'm sure when the speakers like you join in our forums as and you can give presentation, our student, our youth community can learn a lot of things. And second things, we are going for the fundraising option because we want to grow, we want to contribute for our nations and for our communities, and we need support. So we have our Patreon account. You can support our initiative. And final things is that we are also planning for developing our universities. Already we are collaborating with some right partners, what Mr. Rob said, and hopefully we can develop our university, because I visited many countries, many places. It is in MIT or Oxford or Cambridge. I find education is one and only solution. if we want to help our people, help our community, first we have to solve our education problem. We need to do modern research, research. We have to do more innovations. We need to take more like initiative for change our life. But if we do not have proper educations, we cannot do anything. We are observing, even in India, even in Bangladesh, Pakistan, many countries, they are right now struggling with their healthcare system. What is the problem? Problem is that they have brain drain. What Professor Edward said, many people move from the South Asia, from the developed nations, and now they do not have proper healthcare system, proper education system. And example, in South Asia, last 1 year, they lost $1 trillion because lack of technology, proper collaborations, right guideline, proper policy. There are many things. We want to fix this problem. I know this is very difficult job, but I'm sure the speakers like today, those who join World Talent Economy Forum, if we get your support, we can change at least the grassroots level and the many of the community, those who have talented, those who have like lot of positive things. We need to collaborate with them. So thank you for joining today's session. I directly want to go for the concluding remarks. I want to start from Professor Edwards, then Professor Rob, then Professor Talib, then Mr. Aaron, finally Mr. Nicholas, and if we can communicate with Mr. Anthony, then last Mr. Anthony. Yes.
I'll be very
Yes,
brief because I'll be brief because I've pretty much said everything I needed to say. This is an exciting forum. I think space is a place, not a government program. It's a place we can do all sorts of incredible things. And the one thing I would add is think about all of these issues in an integrated fashion. Genetic engineering has something to do with space. Artificial intelligence and robotics has something to do with space. Nanotechnology has something to do with space. These are all interrelated. Think of it as all as a whole. Think of all of these as technologies. These are tools that we can do incredible things. Let's go into the future and do those incredible things. And in Asia, I hope you're as excited about these things as I am.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Professor Rob.
Well, space, any form of exploration has benefits that are far broader than the exploration itself. Just the problems that you solve doing the exploration can have broad capabilities, much like we saw with Velcro. For a developing nation, it probably doesn't make a ton of sense to have your own space program, but it might make a ton of sense to develop and specialize some aspect of it. Space agriculture, carbon harvesting, a bunch of stuff that has broad application outside of the space program. Alternative fuel sources. There's a big push now for alternative forms of gasoline, which probably doesn't have much applicability for space, but battery advancement does. We're re-exploring alternative forms of doing nuclear power. All of a sudden, and much safer forms of nuclear power, which could have applicability not only in space in terms of energy generation, but also on the planet. So I would look for those things that help with the space program, but also have applicability in general society, because that broadens the market for whatever it is you're developing. And you can still participate, but without carrying a lot of the incredibly high cost associated with a full-on space program, which carries an awful lot of weight that a developing country probably couldn't carry. But doing point projects and assisting and partnering, that's something that you can do. And for those of you that have ever wanted or thought you wanted to go into space, I did what's called the Vomit Comet a couple of years back. That pretty much convinced me that space is not a place I necessarily want to go, but I'm perfectly happy to help send other people there. In fact, I can think of another number of politicians I'd like to send there, but that's a whole different conversation. That's all I've got to say for today.
Thank you.
That would be considered pollution.
Yes, thank you. There are a few questions actually. You can understand the urge from the developing nation. Thank you, Abiaz Mustain. Would you tell us what's the role of University of Space Studies? I think they do not have enough facility on space studies from developing nations. Anyways, Mohammad Sohail Rana, thank you for your question. What's the opinion of developing countries' studies for the space? Because I think they love to do space study and this kind of research, so they want to know more. Anyway, Dr. Talib, What's your opinion? What's your guideline for the global leaders?
Okay, now space is not just a place, it's a place and an opportunity. It's a new opportunity for us. And it's an opportunity because we don't know much about, like every other opportunity that occurred to mankind throughout its history. Mankind has been living on Earth for a long period of time. Every day, there's a new chapter in people's lives. And every day we advance a little bit more. If you think about the 1990s, early 1990s, we were living in a different world. The generation that lived there then is different from the generation that's living here now. And it's only 100 years ago. So I think our life is getting better because we grab on new opportunities. That's how I like to see space. It's a new opportunity for us. And our life is better because we are taking these new opportunities ahead, right head on. Universities can become melting pots for new thinking, not necessarily specialize in space. I'm not a space specialist. I'm a world specialist. I know that the world is moving better. 50, 60 years ago, women were not allowed to even vote in Switzerland. Today, it's taken for granted. In 30 years ago, African Americans were sitting in the back part of the seats of the bus, as Edward knows very well. So the world is advancing whether we like it or not. It's the good of mankind that matters at the end of the day. And this good of mankind can be utilized by taking up new opportunities. Space is a new opportunity, without doubt, regardless of the details and regardless of all the technical know-how that many people here are much more qualified than I am to talk about. I see this as an opportunity for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. But one thing just I want to add, sir, like even if our life is improving, even modern science, engineering, technology improving, let's say in India, every day 3 to 4,000 people died, only lack of oxygen. So I think the global community, we need to work together. We need to support South Asia, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, for these challenging situations. So even yes,
Without doubt, Sharif. But the fact is, whether
yes,
we
sir.
do it or not, things are going to get better. They get worse because they get
Exactly, sir.
better eventually. So the world must work together. They must recognize, the leaders of the world must recognize that the world is moving in a certain direction. And that direction must be supported. India must be supported today. Definitely.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Aaron. Yes.
I think that all of Southeast Asia and even Far East Asia absolutely need all the support in the world right now, because some of the most brilliant minds of our age live there right now because of such a high population density. And programs like this, I truly feel like I have part with you guys in planting a seed that in the future is going to grow into the proverbial bamboo forest and just be overwhelming in the raw amounts of growth that we're going to get back from this feedback loop that we create. That being said, the future that I, growing up in the early 2000s, being born in the 90s, grew up looking forward to, the future is here now. We actualize it more and more every day with discussions like these, with breakthroughs and things like that. And it is we, the people, the individuals, this grassroots, it is us who push this forward.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholas.
First off, I'm definitely the least qualified to speak here, so thank you all for allowing me to be here and your words of wisdom. It's been a learning experience, but also it really does go back to economics. And I like the idea of the Venus projects. I wish it wasn't so focused on debt and promise of debt and paying off that debt that ran our global currency system. I wish it was. And, it was a joke, but a social credit system, the more you contribute to society, the more you get back from society, kind of like Star Trek, the captain of the ship gets the greatest privileges in society because he does the greatest amount of effort to bring humans further into the universe and more aware, more knowledgeable, and that is what a leader is. As far as the other topic, though, we were talking about is education. And as far as cultural education goes, we are suggesting that a monetary incentive is incredibly more important than an explorative incentive. And this is an issue. For example, marketing managers make more money than physicists. You know, that's very disturbing to me. Marketers would make more money than a physicist. See, that's wrong. Our values are very off, especially with millennials, people my age. You know, it is a monetary thing first, and that's sad. That type of education needs to shift as a human-centric orientation. We're doing this for the better of mankind, not for profit. And if that ever was shifted into cultural thinking, the world would be much better, faster. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholas. You bring very good points. So I request all of you, those who are observing our show, support India with oxygen, with all of the necessary things. And this is also important point. Do not invest a lot of money only for sports and media entertainments. Invest some money for education, for research, for innovations, for doctors. Even we have lack of doctors and nurses right now. We can understand how the global community is moving. We have to reshape everything. We need to be careful about our healthcare system. So thank you, everyone. It's really, really great sessions. Hopefully your contribution will change many of the grassroots level peoples and their life. And thank you, Professor Rob, Professor Talib, Professor Edward, my young friend, Mr. Aaron, and Nicholas. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's session. Thank you.
Have a good night.
And take care. Bye-bye. Take care.